Welcome back to Chatter on the Wire. Today we're going to take a look at the first melt in the new A1 Foundry forge. At one point here I thought I was going to actually have to consider this a fail, but we'll get more into that later. Okay, so this is actually my second time turning on the burner today, third time ever using this one, so this was completely new to me. Like I said in one of my previous videos, I'd kind of stayed away from propane. I guess it's a healthy fear up to this point. I've watched quite a few people make their own burners, and while I have great faith in their ability, I didn't have all that much faith in my own ability on this one, and decided that's one of the reasons I decided to actually buy a complete foundry from somebody, or a complete forge. Just wanted to make sure that I had some likelihood, trust, I don't know what you want to call it, but wanted to make sure that it was something that had been tested and used by quite a few other people in the past. So anyways, here I am firing up the burner for the third time. I think about 5 minutes before this I had fired it up for just a second or two just to make sure it was working correctly. My goal here was to keep it as low as possible on temperature. Was trying to drive the water out, and you'll see that here in a little bit. But yeah, this was a very successful initial firing up of the burner. Nothing blew up in my face. Very thankful for that. And I think you can see the date down here in the bottom corner. This was just probably about a week ago by the time this gets posted. So one thing you'll notice here is a very orange flame, not much blue in that. Again, I was trying to keep this temperature as low as possible, but part of this was what I noticed over the course of the night while I ran this test is that the temperature of the end nozzle there is that heated up. It had a tendency to change the burn characteristics of the flame, but you'll see it changing colors kind of off and on here over the course of it. I do try to adjust the pressure on the propane that's being sent to the machine here. The burner. Wow, it's gonna be a rough night here. Anyways, I'll go into that more later, but I was having some problems with the pressure regulator and how much propane I could get to the burner. I kind of got that worked out later on in the evening, but we'll discuss that later on in this video. At this point, you can see that nozzle is starting to heat up quite a bit. We have a very orange flame though. We've kind of lost our blue here. I believe little by little, as this continues to heat up, we'll get that blue flame back. But it was a good learning experience overall throughout the evening as I continued to play with this, and I made some bad assumptions throughout the night as well. Thankfully, none of those bad assumptions ended up injuring me throughout this process. So here I am checking the temperature at the very beginning on this initial heating process, trying to drive the water out. I was hoping to be able to control it well enough to keep it right around 400 degrees Fahrenheit. As you can see, I wasn't able to keep it quite that low. I think it topped out at about 600, but we'll see here in a minute. Real quick, the volume that you hear from the flame is about what it actually is in real life. This is much quieter than what I've been used to over the last 2 to 3 years melting with the wood and hairdryer. The whole 400 degrees Fahrenheit, the only real reason I was looking to hold it at that temperature was the crucibles are supposed to be seasoned. They almost all say cook at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 hour, and this is, I believe, an attempt to kind of get them to glaze ahead of time. I could be wrong. This actually could be something that you're supposed to do ahead of time, just to kind of get them up to a main temperature before you cook them at 1400 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take, and risk breaking it. Granted, with any of my crucibles that I've currently been using, I haven't actively turned around and tried to make sure that they are heated all that much ahead of time. I did that the first few times on the main crucible I'm using now, but haven't ever done that again after that. So I really wanted to know what the temperature, or outside of the A1 Foundry's temperature was here. Initially it looks like it was sitting in the 150 or so Fahrenheit range. I checked both sides. The side opposite the burner, of course, was a little hotter here, you'll see, but I think it hit about 180 on the other side, but I didn't see that later on in the night when I was using this. I think this did have a lot to do with the moisture that was in the Foundry at that point in time. It just helped transfer that heat through, was my best guess. I don't know, but the outside was a little warm. You didn't want to grab it with your bare hands, but it was a lot cooler than the outside of my other one, which was typically closer to 400 degrees. So talking about moisture, a little earlier in the video you could actually see the moisture building up on the outside of this. We'll take a closer look at that here. So now that I have this thing dried out as well as I can at this point, I needed to make I believe it's called a plinth, something to sit on the bottom of this, and for the crucible to sit on and be raised up off of the bottom just a bit, so the flame is actually heating the bottom of the crucible and not the side. Got a whole bunch of fire bricks in. Not sure that they're actually the correct type, but this is what was on Amazon when I went and did a quick look. Problem was they were way too wide to go in here, so got out the trusty angle grinder and threw on the mask here and went to town. Cut these in half and it fit in there just perfectly. So before I actually tried to melt something, I decided I better verify that the lifter I had, and the one I've used for pouring as well, would actually fit in here without doing damage to the sides. And so here you see me making this initial first couple attempts here. I am going to need to build some new tongs that I can actually reach kind of straight down in, because I want to buy something that's like an A6 crucible, because I think this one's a 4, and don't yell at me if the naming's wrong here, but I've got a 4 and an 8 or a 10, and the other one's way too big, but I need something kind of in between here, because as I use this evening I realized that it's fine for certain things, but when I have large chunks of metal it becomes very difficult to actually fit them into this. So I really wish I could say that everything went well from here on through the end of the evening, and eventually it did. But for the next probably close to an hour, I kind of fought with this, trying to figure out what was going on, why I couldn't get it up to temperature, and whether I'd made a drastically bad decision to purchase this instead of purchasing one of the devil forges like everybody else has. We'll go through some of my pains here as the evening goes on. So at this point I've topped out at about 800 to 900 degrees Fahrenheit. I've tried adjusting the pressure valve as much as I can, cranked it almost all the way up, and was not hearing anything change in the tone or the volume that gas was flowing into this. So over the next 30 minutes, even after this was shot, I tried different things like removing the K wool around the burners, thinking that it just wasn't getting enough air through there. I know the burners on the Devil Forge have that nice spin contraption, for lack of a better term, to allow a lot more air to be pulled in through the end. Believe it or not, I actually grabbed my hair dryer and tried blowing air in from either the top or the sides, and while that seemed to help a bit, it still wasn't enough to get it quite past that 1250 degrees or so Fahrenheit temperature to get the aluminum to melt. I did get it right up to the melting point, and I had some very nice glowing red aluminum, but not enough for it to actually melt. We'll look at a little more video here, and then we will jump to what the ultimate problem was.
Doesn't seem to pick up nearly as well on the cameras as in real life, but the crucible's actually glowing red now. You can sort of see that on the screen. Part of the problem here was I had used the K-wool that they sent to clog up the air pipe, which was starving this whole thing for too much oxygen, or not enough oxygen. As soon as I removed that, I was able to get the temperature up much quicker. More here in a few minutes.
So the only way I can get that light to turn on is if I either switch back and forth between Celsius and Fahrenheit, which is what I'm doing here, or if I turn it off and turn it on. So it's cheap, but it works. You can see how the temperature here is getting right up there to the melting stage at this point. So at this point, I should backtrack in the story a little. Periodically, over the course of the evening so far, I'd hear a pop, like it was freezing up, for lack of a better term. It seemed to be like no gas coming out. But then there'd be some gas, it would start back up. I've seen quite a few YouTube videos where people have had their tank freeze on them. So I continually kept checking the tank, feeling it. It was cool, but it wasn't creating any frost or anything else like that. So I kept ignoring that aspect of it. I'm not sure if I actually caught it on video. I'll have to look, and if I did, I'll add it in here some point before we finish this up. But all of a sudden, it completely froze up and stopped. There was no gas coming out. I quickly moved over. I turned it off. Again, I felt the tank. The tank wasn't cold. Was cool but not cold. Could not figure out what was going on. It was at this point that I actually put my hand on the regulator, and it was ice cold. I turned the gas back on, wrapped the regulator just with on the bottom with my hand, and you could hear the gas coming out faster and faster and faster. I adjusted the regulator a bit more and was able to actually control the gas for the first time decently over the course of the whole evening. That's how I finally got this up to temperature. It took me an hour and a half to figure this out. I don't know. Maybe it was just a long week at work. Should have figured this out probably within about the first 20 minutes. But, we all have those days and weeks. So at this point in time, temperature's finally up, and the product is finally melting. So I definitely need a camera that does better in low light. Yes, it was dark outside, but it wasn't nearly this dark. So the goal was to actually see the nice melted aluminum being poured here, but as you can tell, this did not show up well at all. So we'll jump to the very tail end where I actually fire up the light on what we ended up with after 2 hours of my time. I would say this all should have been done easily in 30 minutes, and next time I do this, it will. 5 1/4 lousy ingots. It was still fun. I learned a lot from this. Thanks for hanging with me throughout this whole painful process.